evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 132 of the Retrospectives podcast, Parasite Eve. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host James Turlings to discuss this seminal cult classic. James, Parasite Eve, this is a game going into it I thought was a survival horror game. I was very wrong. Did you have any idea what we were getting into, James?
Yeah, see, I was actually planning to pick this game myself in year 1 and 2, knowing full well that this was actually a JRPG.
Thanks for mentioning that to me, James.
Yeah, when you picked it, inside my head, I was kind of having a bit of a giggle, and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll play that.
Because the thing is, like, everything about this points to survival horror. You're like a police officer with limited ammo, and there are monsters. I'm like, this is just a Resident Evil clone, but I was very, very much
very
off the
wrong.
mark. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, that survival horror DNA is still somewhat present to an extent, but it's, not quite what we were expecting, but we'll get into that for sure.
Yeah, so for those who have never listened to us before, James and I are the Retrospectives podcast. What we do each and every episode is that we play a classic of the past, whether it's a popular classic or a cult classic, and then we have a discussion of whether it's truly stood the test of time. This is a pretty harsh standard of criticism because we're not looking to discuss the game in its historical context or just have a nostalgic conversation. But it does mean that the cream of the crop can indeed rise to the top, and we can truly identify the games which are worth your time to play today. Parasite Eve, how did you play Parasite Eve this fortnight, James? I just emulated it on DuckStation, which was very reliable for me.
Yeah, me too. Had no issues pretty much. It was pretty easy to get through. It's quite a short game too, maybe 9-10 hours, maybe more if you want to do optional stuff. But for the genre, it's quite short.
And a good chunk of that is just cutscenes as well. I'd say like at least a third of this game is dedicated to story moments / cutscenes. So it is a much shorter game than you might even think initially. So just a bit of info about Parasite Eve. It's a 1998 action JRPG first released for the PlayStation 1 and developed and published by Square. Interestingly, it's a sequel to a book of the same name, which was released in 1995, which was very popular in Japan at the time of release. It only saw an English translation in 2005. So it was pretty much unknown outside of the West, but this was the era of survival horror when it was really huge. So you can understand why the video game would be popular in the West. You take the role of a police officer called Aya Brea. Aya Brea? I don't know how to pronounce it. There's no
It'd be like Aya Brea.
Aya Brea makes more sense. It probably doesn't rhyme. You start the game and you are attending an opera with a guy who you don't get the name of. I think it just says Man One, so that's once again excellent writing. You attend this opera, and as the lead female opera singer comes on, everyone in the audience bursts into flames and dies a horrific, terrible death, which with a very graphic opening scene, except Aya is somehow unaffected. The rest of the game, Aya pursues the opera singer Eve, who has become mutated and infected by the mitochondria in her cells, which grants her cool superpowers and the ability to frag people. So she can do all kinds of things. She can manipulate her body and light people on fire and turn them to goo and, summon laser beams and all kinds of things. So she's like a super parasite mega person, and you chase her around to try and stop her because you are the only one who can. Everyone else does not stand a chance against this being. Does that seem like a fair summary of the opening of this game, James?
Yeah, I think so too. The game has this like horror presentation, as you mentioned. The intro cutscene is quite graphic and striking, a little uncomfortable in some ways. There's lots of people getting set on fire and screaming. And you essentially, play the role of this police officer trying to hunt down this, superpowered woman who is using the power of evolution to try and replace humanity effectively. That's about it, I think.
Yeah, so I think straight out the gates, what we can say is this does feel like a novel concept to some degree. You know, this is something different from zombies, which is your mainstay in most survival horror games. This is forced evolution, so she does a lot of things like forcing animals to evolve. There's a lot of kind of info dumpy stuff in this game, which talks about the mitochondria and the history of evolution and how she represents the next stage of evolution, and I think that this is probably the only good part of the storytelling, or is that too harsh, James?
So yeah, it is interesting because the author of the original book had a, long background in pharmacology when he wrote it. So a lot of the premise and initial information that they provide ends up being relatively accurate, which I was surprised about because when I started reading the story, I was like, this is all complete nonsense, technobabble, whatever. But like a reasonable amount of it actually has some scientific basis, more than I expected, which was kind of cool to read about. I would say that I agree with you here that all of this kind of stuff, all of the sciencey stuff, is by far the most interesting part of the plot. One thing that I think the game does not a good job of is the way it presents like its characters and kind of the emotional connection you get with those characters. I found each of them to be generally pretty flat and not unlikable, but not very easy to grab onto. I think part of this is the game's. It's got a very noticeable issue with its sound effects. Like when characters talk, there's no noise that gets played at all when text shows on screen. Many of these cutscenes are in complete silence. There's no music playing during any of them,
Mm.
and there's no voice acting to speak of either. So, a lot of potential, I think, emotional resonance that you might have in this story kind of gets lost in the fact that none of it is being reinforced with sound or music in any way for much of the experience. At least that was, what I was feeling for half of the game. And the cutscenes are so long and drawn out that it starts to get a little bit annoying. They don't really try to break it up with like humor or levity, so it's all kind of monotone. And I don't think that any of the characters have interesting, conflicting motivations or personal struggles, that kind of thing. They don't feel like people so much as living plot points. The characters don't really have flaws or quibbles that makes them quirky or fun to latch onto. Like when I was experiencing the story and the technobabble nature of it, the thing that was in the back of my mind the whole time was the stupid recessive genes plot point from Metal Gear Solid One. But all of that is portrayed with much more charismatic characters. Like if you compare Liquid Snake to Eve, it's just like night and day in terms of like voice acting and presentation. So it didn't really hit for me, to be honest.
So the thing that I kept thinking of while playing this game was Final Fantasy VII, which had obviously released a year before, also published by Square. And I think that it does a lot of what Final Fantasy VII does, but worse. And this really ties into its JRPG roots and why it feels like JRPG in its DNA, even if it does seem to initially present as survival horror. The models feel kind of bland. Their mouths are barely moving when they speak, if they're moving at all. And these models feel very cutesy in comparison to the more realistic backgrounds. And Final Fantasy VII actually managed to do a lot of things to make the story and characters more engaging and interesting. But I completely agree with you, James. Here they are emotionally flat and monotone, whereas the characters in Final Fantasy VII had way better written dialogue, way better interactions, way more characterization, and they all just felt very boring here. So yeah, this felt like a horrible execution of what FF7 was able to do with essentially the same kind of technology.
Feels a bit rough to me because there is like an interesting premise here that I think they have the ability to capitalize on. They go for these kinds of twists or sort of twists that they foreshadow a lot that end up being exactly what you'd expect. So it doesn't really have that like oomph shock factor that you'd want out of these things. There's, another Otacon style character who's nowhere near as entertaining as Otacon is. I think your detective partner is the most emotive of the characters by far and ends up being the one that is more enjoyable to have in scenes, but it's not saying much still. I think Aya as a character is pretty bland, although you can kind of give her points for constantly putting herself in danger to do what's right, but it feels very surface level. I still think that the primary negative to me in this is the sound, the lack of music, the lack of any noise while text moves on the screen.
Hmm.
It feels. I checked that my sound was working a couple of times because there was, in the middle of the game, there was this cutscene that lasted like 15 minutes, and the whole time I didn't hear a single thing. I was like convinced my audio was broken until a character started walking and then I heard the footsteps, but it just feels a little off to me.
Yeah, it's just I know exactly the cutscene you're talking about. It's the one where they're like in the police station and they eventually go to the museum and speak to the
Yeah.
scientist, and it just keeps going and going and going. Yeah, I'm on the same page. I was not emotionally invested in this story at all, and I even think Aya is very is you just get no feeling of her being scared or threatened or caring about the events happening. Really, despite their absolutely horrific, terrifying nature, she's just apathy. I got a feeling of apathy from the characters. Um,
Yeah, there was this one point where like the villain sets this horse on fire and makes it pull a carriage, and then the villain is like, "Come, sit with me in this carriage with a burning horse." And I was like, "Who the fuck would do that?" And the main character just like nods and gets on the carriage. It's like, what is going on?
I think the thing here is that I think that the story has is complete. The story becomes completely nonsensical, but it's nonsensical in a large sense and in its smaller moments. There's that moment, and then there's the bit at the press conference where she just starts blurting out to say, you know, this rubbish about the mitochondria when they're trying to, remain professional, and everyone's like, it's just a
Yeah.
normal thing for her to do. I'm like, what the fuck is happening? And yeah, generally a lot of your interactions with Eve are just silly, and yeah, calling back to those Metal Gear kind of interactions where you'd get monologued at by an evil character. I do think the larger story is equally stupid though, James. Like how New York is being evacuated by 5 police officers, and the fact that Aya keeps getting sent in to deal with this threat kind of by herself, and everyone thinks that's a normal thing.
See, I can get behind that because literally everyone else who approaches Eve gets set on fire where she doesn't. So she kind of is the only one that can do these things.
Yeah, but you wouldn't just send a police officer in to deal with the super mega
Yeah.
threat. It like it's maybe this is another JRPG thing. Yes, it makes sense to send a hero in to deal with it, but it doesn't make sense to send a police officer to deal with it by themselves. If you look at typical survival horror stories, usually it's because they're cut off and isolated, and there's something that is forcing them to
So
remain
what
there.
would you suggest they try instead?
For example, just a random example, the city could be quarantined and she's not allowed to leave. So she has to deal with it as best she can. But instead, they're actively sending her out after this threat. It doesn't make sense from a survival horror perspective
Mm.
because you're actively confronting the threat and you're some superhuman instead of you being a vulnerable
Oh, I see
human.
what you're saying. Like you're saying that it's written in such a way that makes the character. It's like got this power fantasy kind of thing where you're
Yes.
the only character that can do anything. Whereas typically in a survival horror narrative, you play as a character who's quite weak and fragile, such that it gives weight to the feelings of horror and atmosphere.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
I see what you're
that's a good
saying.
way to put it. Yeah. And that's why I mean it leans more into the archetype of you being a hero as opposed to yeah, being a police officer, I guess.
Yeah.
Her being a police officer is less relevant.
Yeah, I can kind of agree with that. In general, I think the game's survival horror aspects are quite diluted compared to what I wanted, and that's not just here in the narrative, but also in gameplay too. Which, like, I just think the story's kind of bland, but I wouldn't say it's like it's definitely not the worst story I've experienced because there's a level of
It's like the concept underpinning it is somewhat interesting, and I think that's what sets it aside.
it
This
kind
this
of
feels
carries it.
like
Yeah.
a somewhat original premise. It's just that the execution it just falls down for me in many areas.
Yeah, because this layering of themes like survival horror, like this opera music angle they've got going on, and also this evolution body horror kind of angle, I think makes the story kind of fun to experience because you're not really seeing these kinds of things combined like this anywhere else. So it's kind of hard carried by its novelty, and then the characters and the actual writing and the plot points let it down big time.
I also found that Eve as an antagonist just did whatever the hell she wanted. The fact that she can just kill anyone and everyone in a 360-degree radius around her by messing with their cells felt unnecessarily powerful. And she
Mm.
can turn into goo and just escape through bars, and she can fly, and she can just do everything. And
It needed to be escalating. Like, she needed to start off, like, gaining these minor powers and being a minor threat and being a mystery. And then as the game goes on, it gets more and more scary, I think.
but she's a nuclear bomb threat from the opening animation, and I don't know, she didn't
Yeah.
really work for me as when an antagonist can do everything, they kind of lose a lot of I think what makes them scary. So it just didn't feel very grounded. Yeah, I thought the story of this game was pretty trashy. I think it is, maybe there's enough here from a B movie horror angle, but it was just so silly that I couldn't really get into it.
Yeah, me neither. I'd give this a pretty low grade, honestly, for story. Let's move on to the gameplay, which I think is a more interesting conversation because there are, I think, pros and cons here. There's a few like areas of gameplay we can talk about. We could talk about exploration, we could talk about combat, and we can talk about progression systems, I guess.
Do you want to have a music break first, James?
Yeah, we can do that. I have opinions about the soundtrack, but I want to hear yours first before I'm negative.
It was okay. I thought some of the tracks were quite good. My favorite one was the one that played in the park, which I thought was nice and haunting. Kind of like melancholically haunting. I think that a lot of it is just kind of ambient noise. I think you've kind of like identified the main problem with the music, which is its integration into the storytelling. There are
Yeah.
a lot of cutscenes and storytelling here which would have been elevated by music dramatically. I think Final Fantasy VII does this thing where moments of control of your character and well placed music and all those kinds of things are kind of combined in a way to give a compelling narrative experience. Here, the music is not really utilized as part of that. I don't think I hate the music at all. I think the music is serviceable and fine. And I think that there are some good tracks here, but I really didn't find it that memorable apart from one or two tracks.
Yeah, so my opinion on the soundtrack is quite polarized. So I
Mm,
both really like it and really hate it at the same time. In particular, the song that will play now, that one you mentioned at the park,
mhm.
was the most frustrating for me by far. So this soundtrack was composed by quite a famous now composer named Yoko Shimomura, who we have covered previously on Street Fighter 2. And she also did the soundtracks for, the Kingdom Hearts series and many, many, many Japanese titles. She's quite good, right? So I originally thought that my problems with the soundtrack were caused by hardware limitations because every time I entered a new area and the music started playing, I was like, oh, this is pretty good. I like this.
Mm.
And then about a minute later, the song had already looped like 2 or 3 times, and I was like, oh no. And then I was in the area, that park area, for like 20 minutes. And like in my brain, that one song was just going over and over and over and over again. And the melodies or like the progressions in these songs are very repetitive. So even if the song is like a minute long in total, the same 4 bars of notes repeat over and over and over again within that minute with
Mhm.
slight variation, which makes it feel extremely repetitive, right? So I initially thought that this was a problem with the hardware. They did use 2 discs for this, so maybe disk space was part of the issue. However, I also have played another game that Yoko Shimomura composed for, which is Kingdom Hearts 1, a game I think you've also played the start of.
Yeah, about half of it.
Yeah, so in that game, and I'm specifically referring to tracks from Traverse Town and Wonderland, the music is exactly the same. It has this highly repetitive structure that grates after a couple of minutes and just sticks in your mind for hours afterwards. I had a couple of friends who I had an in-joke with about these 2 songs in particular, and it's the same thing here in Parasite Eve. Interestingly, by the time we get to Kingdom Hearts 2, which she also composed for, that kind of style has completely disappeared because Kingdom Hearts 2 is like the greatest soundtrack ever, right? Or like one of the best OSTs ever for me. So like the fact that on the PlayStation 2 she initially had this issue and then fixed that for the next game tells me I think the issue is with the composition and not with limited space on the PS1 because I haven't had this experience since we did Ape Escape 1. It hasn't been this bad for me. In the past, and we've mentioned this a lot, Patrick says he turns off the music, and I was like, you're crazy. In this game, I turned off the music like many times because it was driving me nuts, which is annoying because I would leave like the police station because it was driving me crazy, and then I would come back and then would think, hey, this is pretty nice. I remember this. Oh, after I was there for a few minutes, which is frustrating because those first minute or two, it's like it's great, and then it drives me nuts after that. So yeah, so I like it, and I also hate it at the same time. So
The only thing I'll say, which is perhaps a saving grace, is that you are not listening to this non-stop in the course of your normal gameplay because your gameplay is getting interrupted by combat encounters which
yes,
have a different track to them. So as you progress through the park, it's not like you're listening to this song for a solid 20 minutes. You are listening to it in bits and pieces and being interrupted by other pieces of music as you progress. So, funnily enough, I found this far less grating than you did, James.
yeah, and that's fair enough. I think probably part of the problem was that during the periods where I was messing about with the progression systems, you would be sitting in the one spot for a while, and that probably caused me issues. But yeah, the park, that bit with the mazy bit, I think you end up doing like a few screens without combat if you route a certain way.
Hmm.
Yeah, just probably the longest period of time you hear the same song. But there are good tracks. Like I like the combat music, and then a bunch of the cutscene music's great. It's just yeah, very very earwormy after a while.
Okay, well, here is the park track, and because we're only going to play it for a minute or two, my opinion will be more valid than
No
James.
way, we're
So,
playing it for like 2 minutes.
okay,
Sorry, here it is. Alrighty, that was the park track. Hope you guys found some enjoyment out of it in the first minute or so. Let's talk a bit about gameplay. I think we'll start with exploration because this isn't a particularly big topic, but this ended up being one of my favorite parts of the game, funnily enough. It's not super like complex. The levels aren't massive. They are kind of small, like PS1 corridory areas with
With doors, lots of doors.
lots of doors. Yeah. And interestingly, something I noticed, not a lot of reused art assets actually. There was a lot of very unique art assets that had unique animations when you interact with them. For example, in the beginning of the game, you explore the opera house and you go backstage into the guest rooms or the actresses' quarters, and there are all sorts of things to interact with, like the clothes rack that you can part the clothes on, or a breakable wall, chests and stuff like that. I actually found that there was quite a lot of secrets in the game too, often hidden behind unique art assets that you never see again in the entire game. And it's only a short game, but I feel like with game development nowadays, there's this big pressure to recycle and reuse art assets to save on dev time, save time creating these 3D models for the artists and stuff like that. And I actually quite appreciated how much handcrafted environmental interaction there was in this game. And all of the secrets were actually quite well hidden. Like there was a lot of chests hidden behind things that you couldn't, because we got a fixed camera, so you like often have to press the A button like behind walls and stuff, and you quite often do find a chest hidden there. I actually had a lot of fun running around the environments trying to find all these. So to me, this added a lot actually, I think.
So, for those who haven't seen this game, it uses the style of the characters are 3D models, but the backgrounds are 2D pre-rendered scenes that are, designed to look like 3D scenes that your character explores. And I think that it's almost always true with these kinds of games because we've done Gorky 17, even something like Siberia. These pre-rendered artistic assets are almost always beautiful, and it's certainly true in this as well. They are a bit low resolution, but they are all uniquely interesting and well designed, I think, and
Mm.
cool to explore. I am less high on the hidden chests though, James. I do not enjoy walking around the environment spamming A to open up things. And I actually found that you had to sometimes line yourself up in an annoyingly accurate way in order to interact with
Yep.
these objects. I don't like games that do this. I don't enjoy this kind of exploration and find the hidden chests and find the hidden angle and all this kind of nonsense. It's something that they do in the 2D JRPGs with secret passages through walls. It's something that
Mm.
they continue to do in Final Fantasy VII. And the Resident Evil games and the Silent Hill games where yes, behind this desk you can press a thing. I just don't enjoy this, but I'm glad you got some amount of small enjoyment from it.
I don't know about small. I'd say like a large part of my enjoyment was this. To be
Wow.
honest,
Okay.
like I really like this kind of thing.
To me, it felt a bit spammy. Like in order to get things, you just run around and press A on everything.
Yeah, but not all of
Yeah,
them.
that's fun for you.
Like,
Okay.
yeah, like there's a bunch of walls and stuff that you have to like walk around at weird angles to find the like. There's like a hidden elevator behind three separate like walls that you can't see character behind. I was like, when I found that, and then it led down to like when those things lead to completely unique rooms that have like five chests in them. You're like I hit the jackpot.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I do like exploration in video games, but for me in my head, exploration is tied more to first person exploration, like being in a 3D environment, being able to look around and observe and interact with the environment.
Yeah.
That to me is good exploration. This to me feels like I'm spamming A on everything and hoping I get an outcome, and sometimes I do and sometimes I don't, and it just ended up being just frustrating because there's a lot of things like there's no there's a lot of the time there's no identifier. Usually with the hidden chest, you can
I
see
I
some of the
don't think
chest.
so. I think most of these have a visual cue to them. There's like, I don't know, I only found a couple where I was like, wait, there's a passage here? What the hell?
When I was in the pharmacy, I just spammed A on the shelves, and some of the shelves had an item in them, and some of them didn't. And I'm like, am I going to have to do this against every single surface in the entire
Yeah, those
game?
ones, yeah, I can see that one I can agree with. And same with the gun store. The it's not always clear with the bookshelves. I agree with that. Stuff like a chest hidden behind something, I normally felt that there was a clue, and that for the most part, my process wasn't just to run through the entire room and mash A on literally everything. I found a large number of these just through observation, which I think
Mm.
probably helped a bit. I think if I had been doing that and I felt like there's no way for me to find these naturally, I would have got really annoyed, like you seem to have.
I wouldn't say I was super annoyed. It's just it was
Okay, it just doesn't do
I
anything for
just
you.
doesn't. Yeah, I don't really see the appeal. I can see why you'd enjoy it though, and I do agree that when there were genuine secret areas, there was more of a sense of satisfaction.
Yeah. This then, I guess, leads us into the kind of the nexus of the RPG and the survival horror elements, which is sort of like resource management going on from
This
item
game has
discovery.
resource management.
Yeah, not really. Which I found annoying actually, because I think it easily could have in the beginning hours. So the issue is that in the opening hours of the game, so you have a limited inventory, which you can expand by leveling up and putting points into inventory size. So you can hold a bunch of different guns, upgrade items, and consumables to heal or cure status effects. A lot of this I found was kind of null and void by the fact that the game gives you a healing spell pretty much immediately as you start the game. So I found that in the first half of the game, I may as well not have picked up any of the healing items because they were pointless, which I found kind of annoying. And it kind of devalued the exploration a bit, and the fact that I had to micromanage my inventory so much to pick everything up felt pointless because half of it I wasn't using but felt like maybe I'll use.
And if your inventory is full and you interact with the chest, it doesn't tell you what's inside the chest.
Yeah, it just offers you to swap the item. So you like swap the item and you're like, oh, this is worse. So you swap it back. It's a
Yeah.
bit tedious there. I think that the game could have gotten away with not giving you the heal spell for like a couple of hours, and I think that would have made like finally getting it feel good, and like the early hours of needing to use potions to stay alive more meaningful. I think it was a huge mistake.
There's a thing going on where you don't really have to manage your mana because when you get into combat, your mana gets replenished to full. We should mention that this game basically has it's very like Vagrant Story in that you have the weapon system and then you've got a magic system, which is in this case themed as you having your own mitochondria powers that are evolving over time as you get stronger. And yeah, but there's no mana to manage your mana potions. You will in between combat, you can like use your mana once. Then when you get into any combat, your mana gets auto replenished to full. So
It starts regenning quit pretty quickly in combat too, whereas it doesn't out of combat, which
yep.
I was kind of happy about, because if it does regenerate out of combat, this leads to this thing where you just sit there waiting until you're on full health by healing. There was at least parts of the game where I couldn't heal to full health between combat without items, which gave some use to the items,
Yep.
maybe, but I still mostly just healed in combat and was fine to do so.
Yeah, the other resource is bullets, but enemies drop so many bullets that you literally never run out.
I
Like
ran out
you're
once.
oh, did
Actually,
you? I was never even close to running out. I always had hundreds of spare.
yeah, so what happened to me, basically, I was using this gun that didn't let you choose who you shot at. And
Something with burst.
yeah, it had random 1.5.
Oh,
So
okay.
when you choose to attack, you can't pick a target, and then it shoots every shot at a different target randomly.
Okay.
And that had 5 shots per use. And then I got up to those enemies that spawn those bouncy balls, and because I couldn't pick a target,
Hmm.
it just ate so many bullets before I killed the thing. I reloaded, swapped to a different weapon, and then yeah, never had that issue again. But that was funny. Um, I think the lack of resource management probably harmed my experience more than anything. I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it just kind of presents it as a potential part of the gameplay, but it's just not. This is just not relevant. You have limited resources, but it doesn't matter because you're given everything you need with your heal spells, and you're given more than enough ammo to deal with every threat in the game. So yeah, once again, it feels less like a survival horror game and more like a JRPG.
All right, so let's jump into the actual combat before we get to, because it's all kind of interconnected, right? So
Yes, so this is the real time with, I guess, action turn based combat is the closest thing I can think to it. We should explain what this is, James, and how this functions.
yeah, so what'll happen, and I was actually quite happy and impressed by this, is that you'll be walking through an area and suddenly you'll encounter enemies like randomly, or it seems randomly. There's actually fixed enemies in this game. So you'll walk into a room, and then a sound effect will play indicating that battle's about to start. And then your character Aya will walk to the center of the room, and then enemies will spawn in the room that you're standing in. There are no, unlike other JRPGs that might load you into a separate combat arena, every battle takes place in the game world in this. There's a seamless transition between battle and exploration, which I thought was quite cool because it was rare to see this thing back in the day, and it makes the world feel more, real and tangible. And sometimes different shaped rooms make dodging different attacks easier or harder, which I think
And the
led.
fixed camera angle remains the same, so you have different
Yeah,
angles to which you view. Also worth noting that you get trapped in this arena. Like it will put walls up around. It turns it into a little combat arena essentially, and you can't escape until you complete the combat encounter.
yeah, there is an escape option which you can
Oh, is
use,
there?
but
I did not even know
oftentimes
that.
you do have to beat the combat to move forward. I did a couple of times manage to use it because there was annoying enemies and I didn't want to bother,
Mm.
particularly in the sewers, which we'll talk about later. Um, but for the most part, you'll want to fight everything for experience. And it doesn't feel. I never really felt that there was so much combat that it was annoying. There are often rooms you just walk through with no combats, but there's quite a lot of it. It's part of the game. So when it does happen, you have a ATB meter, which is something pretty typical of Squaresoft games, right? Like it's a bar that fills up over time, and when it gets full, you get to take your turn, and then you pick shoot. So the weapons in this game are, real life guns. So you have a pistol at the beginning, and it has 2 shots. So you can choose to shoot, and then you can select 2 separate targets or shoot twice at the same target. Guns have range. If you're not close enough, you will either miss or not do or like not do very much damage at all. This is represented by a familiar green circle that we saw in Vagrant Story. When you're taking your turn, there's like a sphere around your character, and if the enemy's in the range of the sphere, you will probably do damage to them. But you probably want to be a little closer.
Mm.
So you'll shoot. While you're shooting, it's like reasonably slow, and you are locked in place, which kind of leaves you
You're
vulnerable to
vulnerable.
getting hit.
Yeah.
Yes. Enemies will generally fire out like projectiles that you can dodge because you can move around in real time when not taking your turn with the analog stick. So you'll generally alternate between shooting an enemy and then running around trying to dodge either projectiles or physical attacks or all sorts of things.
And importantly, the enemies are using the same ATB style of combat as you are. So they will launch their attacks and then it will go on cooldown. So they're locked into the same system that you are, which you can use to make decisions about when to engage.
Yeah, so in, I think, maybe Final Fantasy VII, so traditionally I have not enjoyed ATB systems compared to traditional turn based. I actually think that out of all the ATB systems I've played, this one feels the best because there is actual tactical decision making around my bar has filled up. Should I instantly take my turn to maximize throughput and efficiency? Or should I wait a few more seconds until the enemy attacks? Because if I do it too early and then I'm locked into an attack, the enemy might attack during my turn and I'll get hit because I can't dodge because I'm sitting there shooting.
Mm.
Um, and also, like, when you, yeah, so I found that kind of interplay between deciding when to attack was kind of important. I also found generally dodging stuff's just inherently fun. Like, I think there's a couple of little issues with hitboxes and the camera makes it feel a bit awkward sometimes, but like conceptually, this is the most pleased I've been with this style of ATB take your turn system in quite a while.
I agree, James. This was my favorite part of the game, and I think you nailed it. There's essentially two parts to this. It's dodging enemy attacks and choosing the right moment to attack. And choosing the right moment to attack is important for all the reasons you listed. It's not just about ensuring that you don't get hit by enemy attacks. It's also ensuring that you can actually deal damage to the enemies. There's a boss fight pretty early on where there are worms emerging from the ground, and if you
Mm.
just wait too long after they've attacked, when you start shooting them, they'll be underground again. So you have to find this sweet spot of both evading damage and presenting the most possible damage. So yeah, it's an ATB system where you're not just spamming attack as quickly as you can. And so I don't want to say, I would say more than 50% of the time, I think that the evasion of enemies' attacks works well, although there are a lot of problems with this. And I think that this is something where there's a clear divide between how modern games would do it versus how games were doing it back in the day.
Yeah, and I think it's mostly like the issues that are in this combat system, a lot of it comes down to execution rather than design, because there's
Concept.
some
Yeah.
really good designs. That worm fight you mentioned, there's actually like four worms in the fight, so it's not just about waiting for the one worm to be above. It's like you need to wait for the worm to be above ground, but also the other three worms, you have to be in a position where their attacks won't hit you because they're all attacking at different times, which
Mm.
makes it really interesting to move around and choose when to shoot. Which I really enjoyed that fight, like you did. Some of the projectiles feel like their hitboxes are weirdly shaped compared to your character, so it can be a bit hard to know where to stand, especially when if the fixed camera is quite like low to the ground, it can be hard to see where you are in relation sometimes. But for the most part, it works okay. Um,
Yeah, so this is where I think that the dodging in this game, when it works well, is excellent. But in my experience, there were a lot of incidents where it didn't work well. Like, for example, in the police station, there's these dogmen, and they've got a melee attack that you can bait out and dodge, which feels great. But they also have like a AoE shockwave attack, and I just couldn't figure out how to dodge it. Like, I
yeah,
just couldn't. I took damage every single time. Then there are other enemies with attacks, like ranged attacks, and it feels like no matter where you position yourself, you still are going to take some damage from it. My favorite part in this game was the hospital. And the main reason for that is that it felt like every single enemy in there with a ranged attack felt reasonably dodgeable. There were enemies with different attack types, some which created like an AoE poison on the ground, which was a hazard to your ability to move around. There was the one that shot the little orb out in front of him, then went to the side. There were those enemies with the bouncing balls, and you
yep,
had to choose between prioritizing the main enemy versus the bouncing balls. And it all added up to an experience in the combat, which I felt like if I played well, I could dodge literally everything. And I think this is something that Modern games with dodging systems will always prioritize. They'll always have a system set up that if you play well enough, you can dodge every single attack and play perfectly. The problem with Parasite Eve is that I think that a lot of the time you can't dodge it perfectly, or it would require unintuitive, weird movement to dodge, which you're unable to actually do. So you end up face tanking some damage some of the time, which is far less satisfying. So I think that in general, this system is great, but there are some poor animations and there are some, to me at least, seemingly unavoidable damage that I couldn't figure out how to dodge.
Yeah, the hardest one for me was, did you fight the giant crab in the warehouse?
Yes, the one where you shot off the claws on either side.
Yeah, that thing, you could dodge the bubbles by standing behind it, kind of.
Yes, I was able to dodge the bubbles pretty consistently.
Yeah, I found a couple of times I was able to dodge the bubbles when I took them head on because there are enough gaps, but it was hard to do consistently. But I was like, yeah, this is just playing shoot 'em up again. It was hard. Yeah, my this thing. I don't know if you got a shotgun ever, but that improved my enjoyment of the game immensely. I think I got it either in the sewers or in the final dungeon, and the shotgun hits enemies in a cone. So you target an enemy, and then other enemies standing in the cone will take the same damage. So you can hit 3 enemies for like 70, which is a lot at that time. But it adds this extra layer of positioning that you're like, I want to dodge stuff and I want to be close to do damage, but I also want to hit 3 things at the same time because that's ammo efficient and it's like kind of fun. So once I got that gun, I literally never swapped off it because it made combat really fun, and I was already having fun with the gameplay. So, I've got a hot take here. I don't know if this is a hot take. Um, I realized, well, I was like, I'm interested that a JRPG hasn't felt this way to me before. And then I realized that even though the presentation is completely different, the actual selection of shooting things or which ability to use isn't particularly deep. It's more like the when to do it. So this like kind of gameplay loop of pick the simple damage option, then spend a bit dodging, then repeat. The only other game that I've played like this in an RPG is Undertale.
Yeah, Undertale, absolutely. I was just about to bring it up. I think that
Yeah,
Undertale is a really good analogy because it's a turn based system which has an action based dodging component. Although, in some ways, it's even more engaging than Undertale because it's not just about dodging, it's also about picking the right moment to attack.
and
Um,
positioning,
what
yeah,
what Undertale has over this game is
is
it has
clarity.
clear
Yeah,
clarity. Yeah, you can clearly see the patterns and you can always dodge them. And I would say in general, the patterns are a lot more fun and engaging, particularly in the boss battles. But at a fundamental level, yeah, Undertale is the closest analogy I can think of to this game, which is great. I love Undertale, by the way. Awesome. I know it's
yeah.
obviously a good game, but Undertale's decision to make combat more action orientated elevates it above most JRPGs.
Yeah, I do think that the fact that everything happens in the environment here adds a lot to it too. And I also think that my favorite thing about the combat is how much hit stun gets applied to both enemies and the player equally.
Mm,
It makes the act of shooting things, and the enemies really visibly recoil, and it interrupts their attacks if they get shot halfway between one. Like, they then continue their attack, but it delays them attacking you back. I think
mm.
makes that decision about when to shoot, more interesting because certain enemies you can actually shoot them as they're about to attack and then start moving because their turn got delayed by so much. The feedback on that I felt was really good.
Yeah, there's a sense of threat, particularly when you're fighting multiple enemies, because if you decide to shoot at a bad point, enemies can just all simultaneously hit you and do a lot of damage. I feel like the damage output of enemies is actually extremely well tuned in that you can
Yeah,
afford to take a few hits, but if you are careless, you will die. Like you're not taking so little damage that you can just walk into the area and shoot. You have to be careful, and the game expects you to be careful. So I think that they hit the right point in terms of engagement with the combat, in terms of your damage output and the damage received. Enemies don't feel overly tanky. Bosses feel appropriately tanky in
Yeah,
terms of how long these fights last. I have a lot to praise about the fundamental combat mechanics here. Yes, they are a little shaky in terms of the animations and the tells, I guess.
yeah.
But generally speaking, this is really well done and enjoyable and fun. And I like this part of the game a lot.
Yeah. Now, I do have some criticisms of the combat, and it mostly comes down to your spell usage.
What do you mean? That there is one good spell and it's haste, and I used it all the time.
Yeah, there's haste, there's good. Detox can be useful. Heal is useful sometimes. There was this specific enemy in the sewer, these bats that blind you.
Hmm.
If you get blinded, your attacks always miss. But there is a spell called Energy Shot, which shoots magic, and that will hit even if you're blind. So that was really
Hmm.
useful because the bats individually, the sonar that blinds you isn't particularly hard to dodge, but when there's like three or four of them, and
You
all
get
of
hit.
the
You're gonna
yeah,
get
you,
hit.
you get hit because the patterns overlap and there's nowhere to run to. But if you take out the first two with the energy shot, then you can reasonably dodge and shoot the rest of them, which I
But
found
90% of the time, you're just using haste because it not only improves your ATB counter, it also improves your run speed, which is insane.
really
Like
good.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's the strongest spell in the game by a significant margin, and I don't know why you wouldn't just spam it at every available opportunity. At least as soon as I got it, I was just using it in every fight at the beginning of every fight. Um,
yeah. The fact that it pauses the game while it casts the spell as well, so if you see a really strong projectile coming towards you, you can pause the game to cast haste, then dodge it quickly. That's super valuable.
it is a bit weird that shooting guns doesn't pause the game, but casting spells does. But I mean, it's not a big deal, I guess. It's just interesting that division.
Yeah. I do think that the tactical options afforded by spells is kind of shallow. And I think that, like, enemies have this elemental weakness thing, supposedly, that I just didn't bother with at all.
Yeah, if you scan them, you can see the elemental weaknesses. But yeah, what's the
Sometimes,
point? Like guns are going to be the most. The enemies don't have so much health that becomes relevant.
yeah. So, A, that, like, B, it takes 3 turns. Like, you need to spend 1 turn scanning, then a second turn equipping the weapon with the elemental damage type, and then a third turn finally attacking it. Whereas
Hmm.
if you just spent 2 turns attacking it, it'd probably be dead already because
Yep.
their health isn't high enough. And the second thing that made me not want to engage with that is the fact that scan doesn't work on every enemy, particularly bosses. It won't tell you the weakness. So
Which is the main reason place where you'd use it.
and because it costs a turn to switch weapons, do I really want to cycle through 6 weapons to find the weakness instead of just shoot 6 times with my strongest gun?
I'd rather
Not.
cast haste and start getting some damage in, right?
Yeah, and there's no enemies that are resistant to normal damage, which I think is part of the problem too. If there were like slimes that took no normal damage, then I would be incentivized to try a different weapon.
It's one of the differences between this and Vagrant Story, right? Like Vagrant Story very much emphasized the using different weapons and different damage types and scanning and identifying weaknesses. This just doesn't have any of that, even though it theoretically has the framework for it. You're just shooting things with the gun that you have. And we will get into this in a moment, but the progression system very much incentivizes you to is just have a gun and have your
That's really
main
good.
main gun. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so at a baseline, the core mechanics of the interaction between the real time, the ATB, the guns, the damage drop off, and all of that makes just the act of running around and basic attacking actually really fun, which I think carries the combat hard. I do think that there aren't enough enemies or bosses that need to be dealt with specific magic, or you need to come up with a novel strategy to take down. I think that's sorely lacking here. If they had done that too, I feel that to me this would be like an all-time great combat system. If they had done both of those things in the same game, I think I would love this to bits, but I still just think it's like quite good at a baseline. So
You know, it's so funny, James. Let's zoom out for a bit because we were kind of just having a discussion about this, and it's about like the dichotomy between action style systems and RPG style systems, and whether these things are at odds with one another or if they can work in concert with one another. Because we're talking about Clair Obscur, which is the new French JRPG that everyone is completely mad
yeah,
about. And in that game, you have JRPG systems and you have kind of more action, parry based systems. And you can be good at either one of those, and they're not really working synergistically with each other necessarily. Do you think this is one of those? I mean, well, let me ask you, big picture, do you believe that these systems work well with one another, or do you think that they're fundamentally opposed and that if you lean too heavily into one, it kind of undermines the other?
to some degree, I think they are fundamentally opposed. Like, RPGs are fundamentally about your character having stats and overcoming enemies because, their stats are better and using lots of probability and, like decision making.
Menu based
Yeah, like this
decisions.
enemy is weak to fire, so I use fire, like that kind of match the colors sort of thing. Whereas action games are all about like reaction times and interplay between like very microsecond kind of decision making, like lots of little decisions that add up. And to some degree, I do think there's a fundamental conflict between these two ideas. I do think, however, that this game is in a unique position where it has the potential to bring them together in a satisfying way, where I think a lot of games don't necessarily have the ability to do that. So, like, it's kind of frustrating to
Well,
me.
like Undertale, for example, very much is about the action in
Yes,
combat. Like the RPG systems and that are
non
basically
existent.
non-existent. There's a little bit you can equip different, a defensive item and a attacking weapon, and they can do slightly different things. But for the most part, it's very much just about the action on screen. I guess the question would be that if Undertale had stuff like that going on in the background, would it have been a better game? Because the emphasis would have moved away from that action, or it would have made that less important in favor of, if you build your systems correctly, you can kill this enemy twice as quickly, or you can receive half damage. And does that make the game better or worse or
See,
just
I
different?
think when we're talking about stuff like doing more damage or taking less damage, I do think that that specifically is in conflict with what this game is trying to do. Like this idea of that you can avoid damage if you play well. That I think we can agree on. I think things like the enemy has this unique ability that you need to nullify by recognizing that and using a particular thing that then enables you to do the action based gameplay. Like with the bats, I was glad I could use that spell when I was blind. That kind of thing that I
Mm.
noticed was satisfying to me. I think that that kind of, match the color sort of thing is more tenable here than systems that just make you do more or receive less damage, which I think takes away from type balance, which is more important in an action based game.
Yeah, I think what you kind of need here is that you need to have combat encounters that are a lot more
Yeah.
complicated. So, like, to just give you a random example, when you're fighting a boss, let's say there are four pillars in the room, and each of those four pillars do something different. So, one might give the boss extra armor, one might shoot out regular projectiles, one might give the boss spell immunity, and you have to decide when to attack the pillars versus when to attack the enemy. And then it becomes this thing where you are making I guess, decisions and tactical, interesting decisions. My concern a lot of the time with these JRPG mechanics is that what they boil down to is power scaling your character to do more damage or power scaling your character to receive less damage, as opposed to actually giving you decisions to make. It's just that this fight is easier because I have power scaled my character in the
Yeah,
correct way.
like another example that they could do is like you could have an ability that slows or stuns, and there could be specific like two boss encounters where one of them needs to be crowd controlled while you damage the other one at certain point, like that kind of thing. Like
Basically everything in Slay the Spire. If anyone's ever played Slay the Spire before, that's a game where you have to balance your debuffs and buffs and damage output and defense, and you're making decisions every single turn because the enemies will fuck with you in different interesting ways.
I'm surprised that we don't see many similar games to this because it's actually really fun at a baseline, and I feel
Mm.
that this game doesn't tap into the potential that's here, which I think is quite high actually.
It feels like there's design space here for
Yeah,
sure. Like I think that definitely having this hybrid actiony RPG system thing has a lot of room where we haven't really seen it explored properly in modern games, which is very interesting. And Undertale is really the only one that comes to mind for me.
yeah, pretty high about the gameplay here actually, and I was enjoying it a lot more than I expected it to as well. So good stuff.
Did you have a favorite area? Because for me, as I said
The
earlier, it was definitely
hospital,
the
yeah,
hospital,
it
just
was the.
because everything was telegraphed, the attacks were telegraphed so clearly, and it felt very
It also
fair.
felt the most survival horror to me because, especially down in the basement, like the way that you were trying to unlock the path forward by exploring the rooms. And also,
Yes.
this is kind of the point in the game where there's like this little dip in the effectiveness of your healing spell compared to the items you find before you get, I think it's the rank 3 heal, which made,
Heal
yeah, which
through, yeah.
made it feel like the resources actually mattered for a little bit, which made me enjoy it more. And like you said, the enemies are really well designed here. So, yeah, I loved that.
Anytime the enemies like created a hazard on the floor, so there was spiders with the webs or the poison on the ground, I thought that was
Yeah,
fantastic. That really added a lot to the flow of the encounters because it was just another interesting thing to worry about. So yeah, thought it was
yeah.
really good.
Um, let's go to one more music break, and then I want to talk about areas I didn't like, and talk about the progression systems, and then round up. Sound good?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Excellent. So we've been talking about the combat. This is the combat theme. I thought it was pretty good. Enjoy. Alrighty, getting closer to the end now. We just talked about the hospital, right, as being an area that I enjoyed. Patrick, how did you feel
Hmm.
about the sewers?
They're all right. It sounds like you have a bit of a bugbear about them, so you take the lead. How did you feel about the
I
sewers,
really did
James?
not like the sewers. It's like a big grid of rooms that look exactly the same, and it's kind of like a
It's huge. There's so many rooms as well. It's like most of the areas here are like I guess 10 to 15, maybe 10 rooms. Felt like there were like 20 sewer
yeah.
rooms.
I was like, this is ridiculous. I gave up and looked up a map and was like, so glad I did because it's so confusing. I was like, what the hell? Why would they do this? Like, it's actually not too hard to find the exit, but if you want to, like, you could easily get lost, and there's nothing really signposting where you are. So I feel like you could wander around here lost for quite a while. I really didn't like that.
It's also exacerbated by I feel like this game could be dramatically improved if there weren't respawning enemies.
Yep.
I don't know why the enemies respawn. If you could just kill an enemy and then that area would be clear, it would be much better and would also improve navigation because you would know when you're in an area that you visited before.
Yeah, I completely agree. There was this one. So in the police station, there's a battle that happens, and down in the basement at the gun shop, one of the characters offers to take junk off your hands, I think, and you can get rewards if you give him a lot. I didn't ever hit
Mhm.
that amount, but I tried. And outside of that room, there's a battle, and it rewarded me 3 junk. So I went back into the room, gave him the junk, stepped outside, battle again, and that happened 4 times in a row before I finally stepped out and it didn't give me a battle. It was like, this is stupid. And I only did it because it gives you so much junk and your inventory is limited. I was like, I don't want to carry this around, but the guy that takes it is right here, so I may as well. I was like, I should just
I did look that up. You need 300, James.
what? That's a lot. Okay, what do you get? What do you get?
You get. I think you just get a special weapon. Like you get to choose one of a bunch of special weapons, and
Yeah,
it's very
okay.
strong. Yeah. So yeah,
Uh,
just JRPG nonsense.
yeah. Okay. Well, waste my time then. But I agree with you. If they didn't respawn, the game would be better.
Yeah, for the most part, the areas are pretty clear to go through, but definitely in the later game, these areas get a bit better. The museum is of a similar size, but I think that the
Layout's
it's
much
more
cooler.
uniquely designed, right? So you can recognize the areas more distinctly from one another.
Absolutely. And also, like, I found the museum cool to go for because there's like this thing where you go up and down floors through different methods, like there's stairs and an elevator, these bits you jump
Broken window.
down. Yeah, it's quite cool, I thought. And it all loops back on itself in different ways, and you get keys and stuff. That was more interesting to me. The sewers were just everything looks the same in a game which I up until this point was quite high on visually for all the unique art assets, and suddenly it's like, oh, they ran out of budget.
Time for a
uh,
sewer level.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a classic, isn't it? Every game needs to have a sewer level because everyone loves sewer levels.
Yeah. Also, while we're talking about visuals briefly again, I do want to mention the CG cutscenes have not held up at all, in my opinion.
It's mainly the character models once again.
Yeah, also the brown flesh goo stuff, I think, looks like it was straight out of Ecstatica, so I don't
It
know.
does look like shitty CGI, doesn't it? That's really what
Yeah,
comes to mind. Shitty
yeah.
CGI from those, not late '90s movies. Like, in fact, there's a movie. I don't know if did you ever watch the Evolution movie, James? It was like a comedy.
I think I did. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
one with the
that
three eyes thing on
yeah,
the
that's what I
symbol.
kept thinking of because
Yeah.
obviously, this game is about rapid evolution, and that's what the movie was about. And it's probably got about similar levels of CG quality, and that shit has not aged well.
Yeah, that is entirely fair. So yeah, that kind of I do think that the first time that rat transforms in the hallway was kind of cool though.
I
A
liked how
couple.
the dog's head split into
Oh yeah, that was
three. That
gnarly.
was
It's
pretty
pretty
sick as
good.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
it's not like all bad, but
yeah, shows its age, but that's okay.
a lot of
Um,
the enemies, for those who have seen the thing, a lot of the enemies look like
yeah,
variations of the thing.
lots of flesh monsters.
progression systems.
Yeah, let's talk about it. What was your thoughts?
Well, my initial thoughts was, what the fuck is this? Because I think
Hmm.
that the presentation of this is incredibly confusing. I destroyed the weapon I was trying to upgrade multiple times before I figured out what I was doing. I didn't understand what upgrading did or how it worked. So I think that straight up initially, the when you first start engaging with this, it's terribly presented, and there must have been a better way to try to do this. The basic idea behind it is that you can sack weapons with tools to move their attributes to other weapons. And the way this plays out is that you can kind of create a custom super weapon over the course of the game by moving various attributes from different weapons to your main weapon. I did end up Googling this to better understand it because I couldn't quite figure it out on my own terms. I think it is fun how you can create your own cool super weapon over the course of the game. And
Yeah.
I think that there's probably replayability here as well, because you can
Hmm.
probably do different cool combinations once you know what you're doing. But in the end, it did feel a little limiting,
Obtuse, maybe? Yeah.
obtuse and limiting, because it's hard to comprehend what's going on at first. And I think that as a new time player, you end up sticking to a pretty simple strategy, which is, at least for me, identify what the good weapon is and then upgrade that good weapon to get you through the game.
Yeah, so there's a bit here with the weapons. So weapons have stats, so they have damage, range, and ammo capacity, which is important because reloading makes you stand still and be vulnerable. And then they have passive abilities. So some of the early ones are like shoots twice, or shoots 3 times, or shoots 5 times, or shoots 7 times. And then some of them are like deals fire damage, deals ice damage,
Deals
makes things
AoE damage.
deals AoE damage, shoots at random targets but does 50% more damage in total.
There's one
Shoots.
which gives you like a chance for your ATB bar to be full at the start of the combat.
Yep, one that I got near the end of the game was pick 2 actions when you take your turn, which just means you can pick shoot twice, or you can use a spell and shoot in the same turn, which was pretty powerful, but also dangerous because you get locked in place for a long time if you shoot twice with a 5 times weapon or something. And I found these generally fun. Armor also has stuff like the best one was either more inventory slots or auto, which uses healing items when you die automatically instead of you dying. That was the best use for healing items I found by a lot, was having an auto armor on the whole game.
I also used auto.
And I kind of found it fun to craft my ultimate item because at the end I had a shotgun that shot in a cone that let me go first and let me pick 2 actions and shot twice. Because I didn't notice this at the beginning, but when you have a gun that has shoots 3 times or shoots 5 times, each individual bullet does like 20% less damage. So
Mm.
it still overall does more damage for each turn you do, but it becomes less ammo efficient. So I had a SMG that shot 5 or 7 times, but randomly. And for a large portion of the game, that was super efficient. Like, it was annoying that I couldn't make certain enemies die quicker, but it still took less time to kill things. Until I came up with enemies that spawned more enemies, and then I was fucked. um,
Oh.
yeah, but I kind of liked that. It does kind of devolve into just stacking as many attributes on the same gun as you can, and most guns give the same attribute spread, which I think is kind of boring too. So I don't know, it's fine. I like when progression systems like this are unique. Because I've seen so many at this point that finding a new one that I haven't encountered before is fun. It could be better for sure.
Yeah, I think that if this was more clearly presented to the player, it would have been a little bit better. I also think that having you just have one gun that you use ends up being just a little a
too
little
overpowered.
boring.
Yeah,
Well, a
I,
little boring. I think that if you were having to swap between a few different gun types, like the game even has gun types. It's got SMGs, assault rifles, rocket launchers, pistols, or whatever. I think that if you maybe couldn't, if you had to like have a weapon of each category, and that would be more fun instead of just having one weapon. Because
yeah,
then you could swap to the weapon that you thought was best for that encounter, and there'd be a little more decision making. It's not awful. I wish it had been made clear what was going on at the beginning because I was very lost at the start of the game. I just feel like there is more to be tapped into here. Transferring attributes over is cool. Transferring attributes to one gun ends up being a little limiting in terms of potential.
yeah. I think they need to make elemental weaknesses actually matter, and also like they need to do things like, the shotgun is good against armored enemies on the ground, and a rifle is better when there's an enemy flying in the sky high above you, something like that. Like ways to make weapon choice in combat more meaningful. I think that would have gone a long way here, which,
Yeah, and if you think of like games with guns generally, shotguns, sniper rifles, pistols, rocket launchers, they all have their place, and you can have a video, a shooter game that utilizes them. It is more interesting if a turn-based game can somehow translate those different roles over to somehow into this game, and it just doesn't happen. So yeah, it's okay.
imagine if you had this game's combat with like Halo, and you had, the same kind of this gun is good against this enemy thing is going on in that, or like,
Shields, yeah.
yeah, that would make you'd have a really fun game on your hands, I think.
Range could play more of a role. So there's some enemies you want to stay out of close range, some enemies you want to get much closer to, like this enemy is immune to long range attacks. So you have to get in close. So you swap to your shotgun, get in closer, use that. Change back to your rifle, shoot the flying enemies that keep swooping and are staying out of your close vicinity, etc., etc. I guess what I'm getting at is there was room for these systems to do a lot more, and they just don't. Which is okay. Like, I don't want to blame the game for being something it's not. It's just that I felt like these systems were okay, but I wasn't like, oh yeah, these progression systems are really fun. It's just I kind of got incrementally more powerful over the course of the game.
Yeah. It's my running theme with this game is that there is a huge amount of untapped potential here in this style of gameplay, which actually makes me excited to find more things like this because I think you could do a lot here that wasn't done, but as it stands, it's already pretty good in general.
Yeah, that's really all I've got on progression system.
Yeah, final impressions, Pat? What did you think of Parasite Eve?
So I'm actually going to say that on balance, I do recommend Parasite Eve, and I think
Hmm.
it's entirely on the strength of its basic combat systems. I wouldn't say this is like an incredible game. I didn't love it to pieces, but I did have a good time with it. I think that the shorter runtime does help a lot with this, as is often the case with these games. There's some nonsense with the story that you kind of have to suffer through and that you get bored with. But at the end of the day, the moment to moment gameplay in this game is pretty damn solid. And even though it's not a survival horror game in the end, it's an actiony kind of game that is fun to play. So Parasite Eve, I think, is a solid little game, and I do recommend it. And I think that if what we've talked about sounds interesting and you enjoy Undertale, there's enough here that you will enjoy your playtime with Parasite Eve. Uh, Niggles aside, yeah, it's a pretty solid game. Didn't love it, didn't think it was the best, but it was okay.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that because my overall impression of the game is similar in that I think it's quite a solid title, in that, other than the fact that they made basic attacking so fun in an RPG, nothing really blows me away. Environmental exploration is good. Music is fine, if very repetitive. Sound design's quite lacking, and some of the visuals have aged quite a bit, but the solidness of the moment to moment gameplay is good enough that I can still recommend this one. But to me, the appeal of this game actually lies less in the act of playing it, but more as like, this game is a really cool case study of what could be. Like, I think it's
Mm.
worth playing this game to just see something that, there's untapped potential here. That excites me, actually. Like, I found I am more glad to have played this game than I actually enjoyed playing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and the thing
Because
is, I would be really interested to see if there's an indie game out there that has expanded and built upon this. Because there might be, like the indie game scene is so bloody expansive nowadays that surely someone's made a spiritual sequel to this. Surely.
yeah, like a game that makes resource management more important, makes decision making and combat a little better, tightens up hitboxes and enemy patterns, and makes a decent go at a reasonable story, I think could be like an actual, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10 game. This isn't the peak of this style, but there very well could be something like this in the future. So,
Sorry,
okay.
I'm being very unprofessional and going to Google. Someone mentioned Transistor as kind of like a game
Yeah,
that yeah, I can kind of see that. I can see how that's kind of taking a lot of the same elements.
I do love that game to bits. It's
Yeah,
really good. It is a little different though. Um,
slightly better music. Hey.
Slightly. Yeah, much. Yeah, some of the best. um, I want to play that again now. But yeah, this game has a sequel that I would be very willing to play to see if it improves upon the base formula, because I think there's a lot to improve on here, and it could be really, really good.
Rosso was saying in our Discord that the second game does change it and turn it into more of a genuine survival horror experience.
Okay.
Like it turns the controls into tank controls. Like
Huh.
actually changes them back to tank controls, which is fascinating. I can't think of a single game that went in that direction. So
That's fun. Well, we'll definitely have to check that out at some point. But yeah, good pick, honestly, even though maybe you didn't get out of it what you were expecting to get out of it.
yeah, thanks for the heads up about that, by the way, James. I see you care deeply about me. Yeah, no, it was an interesting game. And yeah, I wasn't blown away by it, but it was, yeah, a solid little title. So thank you so much for listening to us talk about Parasite Eve. We are the Retrospectors podcast. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. We also have links to our Discord server there, which is where we take all of our recommendations and have most of our interaction with our community. And if you really love the show, you can support us monetarily on our Buy Me a Coffee page. We'll pop a link to that in the show notes as well. So, James, Parasite Eve is out of the way. Somehow I picked a JRPG. Anyway, what are we doing next episode? Because now it is your pick.
It is my pick, and the other week we played through Ico, and that reminded me that we haven't touched 3D Zelda yet, so I think it's time. We're going to give Ocarina of Time a spin, which is, a very famous game out in the gaming world, and one that I loved to bits as a childhood. We try to steer away from nostalgia titles a bit, but to me, it's like, I think we really should cover this one, and I think it'll make good discussion. Because I don't think you've played too far through the game.
Well, this is the thing. It might be nostalgic for you and many others, but it will not be for me because I didn't have a
Hmm.
Nintendo 64 as a kid. I was obviously familiar with the existence of the game, but I, about 10 years ago, I might have played the first 10% of this game. But generally speaking, I have zero nostalgia attached to Zelda. So I get to go in full ball and actually critique this without that veil. Whereas, unfortunately, James, you're going to have that heavy veil over your eyes.
Yeah, like spoilers, I'm gonna like the game, but
Wow.
I actually think I will be able to pick apart some bits that maybe could be done better. There's certainly some things, Cough Water Temple, that are, pretty bad, but I think as a whole, the game was pretty ambitious, so it'll be really fun to talk about this one.
I think so too. I am interested in playing it because obviously Ocarina of Time is one of the most influential games of all time. Like there's
Yeah.
no doubt about it. So I am intrigued to find out how I mean it did a lot to invent 3D dungeon design and open worlds and everything. So it is a game that I am very, very happy to play and interested in playing. So yeah, good pick, James.
Yeah, I'll be really excited for that one.
Alrighty, well, just about does it. We will see you next episode for Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
See you later, guys.